We're starting to let people in. It takes some seconds until everybody is here. Okay, fine. Let's go. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Daniela Klaus. I'm the General Secretary of Press Club Concordia here in Vienna. I'm greeting you from Vienna, and greetings to wherever you may be. Even our speakers are from several time zones. Luisa, it's 8 in the morning, so a shout out to you. Thank you for joining, and thank you to all our speakers for joining. A very nice morning to you, and good morning to all our participants. This is a seminar in the series of events Europe's Context, which is a cooperation between the Press Club Concordia, the Forum for Journalism and Media in Vienna, and the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Welcome to Ivan Vejvoda, Acting Director of IWM and the Director of Europe's Futures. And of course, also welcome to Mirjana Tomic. Hello, Mirjana. She is the brain and heart behind this series, and I think everybody knows you by now. Just an information, we are recording this session and it is also live streamed. We have a discussion now and then Q&A, so everybody feel free to join the discussion. We are talking about succession and failures of COVID-19 vaccination rates in Europe. We have perspectives from several countries, from Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Russia, Portugal, and Denmark. Thank you again to our speakers. You will be introduced by Mirjana shortly. The topic is timely and of utmost importance, as you all know. In Austria, particularly today, a mandatory vaccination will be introduced. It's very interesting to see that, and in contrary to see Denmark with a completely different policy. One of the question is, how should media and how should citizens interpret these differences? We shall not talk about Austria today, but I think it is also very interesting for the Austrian colleagues to see the context. Our speakers are government advisors, university professors, and journalists, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion very much. And that's it from my part. And now the word goes to Ivan Vejvoda. Ivan, thank you. The screen is yours as always.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you, Mirjana, for organizing this. It's always a great pleasure to welcome you. I think not only is the topic timely, but we are all, dare I say, somewhat confused, not only by the numbers, but by the information that we are bombarded with every day on the seriousness of the various variants of the COVID-19. And I will just sort of put a question, because I think that if the role of the World Health Organization, everyone, is to save as many people as we can, then in my world, we need to deploy every available vaccine, whatever its particular level of efficiency is. I say that because the Olympic Games start tomorrow, and China has 2 vaccines that have not really been recognized. Yes, the World Health Organization has recognized Sinopharm, but many countries do not actually allow people to use it. They are barred when their vaccination is checked. And yet you have this paradoxical situation that about 130 sportists from 130 countries are going to China, where everyone is vaccinated with Chinese vaccines. I would use the word hypocrisy in many cases, and that is why it is interesting to look, because we focus on Europe in these talks, to see why we are seeing these differences. What are the cultural, social, economic, and other reasons that we see the differences in rates of vaccination and approaches to the rules of behavior in society? Mirjana, to you.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Thank you so much, Ivan. Good morning, everybody. And thank you so much for accepting the invitation. I will just make one small memory, if you want. On 16th of March 2020 began the first total lockdown in Austria. We had 4, I think. This morning, right now at 9, Austrian Federal Council decides about the mandatory vaccines, and Austria has 74.5% fully vaccinated citizens. This is not, that doesn't include boosters. 2 years ago, most countries had similar policies. Currently, they're very different. Why? Does one country have more knowledge than others? Is it about vaccination rate? Is it about political situation before the pandemic? Is it about media and conspiracy theories? Is it about pandemic or something else? I have invited professors, journalists from countries with the highest and the lowest vaccination rate, plus Russia, which is sort of in the middle. Why Russia? Because it was the first country to announce vaccines, but has not really mentioned its own vaccine, but has not mentioned to convince its own citizens to be vaccinated. So I shall briefly introduce the speakers. Our first speaker will be, I hope I pronounce everything correctly, Michael Bang-Petersen. He's a professor of political science in Aarhus in Denmark. He leads HOPE project, the large-scale research project on how democracies cope with COVID-19. And he is the chief government advisor in Denmark on non-medical stuff. And he proudly announced that the government in Denmark, based, I assume, among others, on his advice, has abolished all measures. I will mention later just a few things about his study, and then he will tell us more about it. Our second speaker is Richard Kolar. He's associate professor of mathematics in Bratislava. He's also government advisor of Slovak government, but on epidemic dynamics, and Slovakia has not managed to vaccinate even half of its population. Our third speaker is Dimitry Dubrovskiy, associate professor, High School of Economics and Center for Independent Social Research in St. Petersburg. And he will tell us why Russians don't trust their own vaccine. Then Oana Popescu-Zamfir, director of think tank Global Focus in Bucharest and also a journalist. The situation in Romania is not very good. It is only about 40% of the vaccinated population, and she will explain to us why. And then we have Evgenii Dainov. I hope he managed to join us, from Bulgaria, a country with only 29% of the, he's also a university professor of vaccinated population. And at the end, we have the best student in Europe, Luisa Meireles, a journalist and director of information of Lusa news agency in Portugal, to explain why Portugal has been so successful. The speaker will be, when I say speaker, I'll basically ask questions. This is not about presentations. And so I'll ask 2 rounds of questions, and then the audience is invited to ask live questions. So, Michael, in your study, you say that there is a large variation in vaccine acceptance from 83% in Denmark to 47% in France and Hungary. Your conclusion is that, that it is very important how government communicates, and your keywords are trust, that one should avoid polarizations, and that also not only that people have to trust the government, but government has to trust its citizens. You also mentioned personal choice versus moral duty. Can you tell us why? If all of these elements are present in Denmark, why you think it is a success that Denmark has opened, totally abolished all measures? And let me say that the vaccination rate, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is 81% in Denmark. Please, Michael, just the main ideas behind what I think you think is Danish success.
All right, thank you very much, both for the introduction and for the invitation to come here and talk about these very important matters with you all. So yes, it's absolutely correct that the vaccination rate in Denmark is 81% for the first 2 doses, and then we have a booster rate of 61 of the entire population. So that's pretty high coverage in terms of booster vaccines, and everyone above the age of 5 are eligible to receive a vaccine. When we look at, if I should try to explain why it is that we have been lifting the restrictions, then it is essentially because in order to have restrictions within the legal framework of Denmark, then you need to be able to classify the disease as a threat to critical functions in society. So it needs to be a society-wide threat in order to have any restrictions at all. So if you cannot justify that, then you need to scale back all restrictions. So that's essentially how the law regulating the epidemic response is set up. And what we have been seeing over the last month is more and more data showing that the Omicron wave is a mild wave. And that's of course not just because that Omicron is milder, but also because Denmark is a very highly vaccinated population. So what I'm saying here is not that this necessarily will be the case everywhere. This has been the judgment of the Danish Health Authority, but it's also a judgment that resonates very well with the Danish public. So we are tracking each day since the beginning how the Danes feel, to what extent they are personally concerned, to what extent they are concerned about society, and there has been a very, very sharp decrease in the sense of societal threat over the last months as there has been this decreasing pressure, especially on intensive care. This doesn't mean that Danes are in principle opposed to restrictions at all. People have been highly in favor of the first lockdown, the second lockdown, and they were in favor of imposing these restrictions in December. But they are also, we are also having these high levels of trust, which means that when authorities go out and say, well, the pressure is falling, then people are accepting that. And when they don't see the exact threat that they care about being present right now, they are ready to say, okay, well, then we remove the restrictions, not as a principled opposition to restrictions, not as an act of defiance against the government, but exactly because that the focus is on the pressure on society. And part of the reason why the government is also pursuing, and why there is why all political parties in parliament supported the lifting of the restrictions is that there is a focus on a balanced approach to the pandemic in Denmark. So it's an explicit part of the strategy to balance health concerns with concerns for the economy, with the well-being of people, and focusing on upholding as many democratic rights as possible despite the crisis. So in that sense, there's a sense that that waiting is not free. So even though you could say, well, it would be nice to wait a few more weeks with lifting the restrictions just to make sure that everything is fine, then that comes with cost too, especially in a situation where the public believes that the crisis is indeed over.
Thank you. We shall go around. You know, what is confusing, I'm just saying, is to us citizens, is that the numbers of newly infected in Austria, I'm using the example of Austria because in Denmark and Austria, we have free tests, everyone is being tested, etc. The numbers are about the same and the reactions of the government are totally different. So for citizens, it is confusing. And the Danish example has been all over TVs in Europe, like they are opening. I'm just wondering what happens if there is a step back, or there will be a step back, but we'll discuss it later. Richard, when you and I spoke about this event, you told me that you followed the dynamics as a mathematician of the epidemic in Slovakia. You told me that half of the government is not vaccinated and the opposition is against. So how can one in that situation function? How can one fight the pandemic?
Thank you, Mirjana, for invitation. So I will just start as a mathematician with facts and data, and then I will try to give some interpretation. Although I'm a mathematician, not a sociologist or psychologist, or politologist, who would be actually needed to analyze the situation better. I also say that I'm not a official advisor of the government. They actually use the external advisors whenever they need it, and sometimes they need it for changing the public opinion, and so it's happening on a very wild basis, I would say. So let me start with the facts and data. Really, the first point I highlighted because I was looking over the last week for the sources of this low level of vaccination, and I think I found something quite interesting to your public, and I will get to it. So first, the first fact is that there is a very high level of distrust in society in Slovakia. I will use the data from Eurobarometer, the latest version in winter 2020-2021. And you can see that in Slovakia, the trust in government was only 24%, which is compared to European Union average 36%. So it's much lower. The same is for the parliament. You may say, okay, that's typical in Eastern Europe, but you need to keep in mind that this is only half a year after the elections. So usually, countries later in the election cycle actually have such a low level of trust into the government. So this is quite low and surprisingly low. Also, the low level are injustice, which is comparable to Bulgaria, Croatia, and other countries where you see a high level of vaccine hesitancy. So on the other hand, the average trust in European Union is very comparable to other countries. So it's only the trust into their own structures, own government, and all on public services. Also, you don't see any differences in economic recovery. That's really negligible. It's really just in the institutions. So that's the first fact. The second fact is that there was a very high level of dissatisfaction with own pandemic measures. So the public in general is not very happy about how the pandemic was handled, and this was again much lower level of satisfactions. Actually, almost the lowest one in Europe, except Czech Republic and Latvia. And also, people find very difficult to cope with the mitigation measures. Again, comparable to other countries, only a few. So it means that people didn't perceive the pandemic is handled the right way, and they felt that it's very difficult to cope with, although the measures were not so hard compared to other countries. So people perceived that they are in a much worse situation that they were really are. Also, we saw actually in a short time the drop in satisfaction with public services from 50% to 25% over the first half a year of pandemic. So people really felt that something is breaking down in the country, and they felt, okay, so probably I need to look somewhere else for trust. So I believe that's what was happening some way. Media, on the other hand, very often are denoted as the source of mistrust. So in many countries, all the fake news and so on, conspiracy media are considered to be the source of the mistrust. That didn't happen that much in Slovakia, at least at the beginning. Actually, people are really all the mainstream media in Slovakia.
Can someone turn off their computer? Someone is typing. We hear the typing in the back of Richard's talk. Can people turn off please go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, so the mainstream media, this is quite unique in Slovakia. All the mainstream media were really, supporting vaccination as much as possible. There were no questionable articles in the newspapers or in the television. That maybe some very, special cases, but otherwise there was a unique voice of the media, of the mainstream media, that vaccination is good and very useful. On the other hand, people really in the Eurobarometer indicated very high level of mistrust and into media, and they believe that media are biased or misinterpreting reality. So there's a mistrust in the mainstream media, and there's also one of the highest levels of trust to people around you. And I will get to that because this is one of the main points. So in Slovakia, there's a very high level, 28% of population say that trust mostly with the information about the pandemics or vaccination with their friends, 28%, compared to Denmark, 3%. Okay, so I will get to that because this is really a key point and it will explain a lot. So the last fact I want to mention is that there was a serious drop in willingness to vaccinate in spring 2021. So until then, actually willingness, in Eurobarometer was only a little bit below the average in Slovakia compared to other countries. We had 10% higher interest than Hungary, Poland, even Austria, and actually even higher than France. We are almost on the level of European Union. So 60% of population were interested in winter 2020, in around December 2020, and 23% actually wanted to be vaccinated later. So 83% actually indicated interest. Only 50% got vaccinated. So something really happened, from winter 2020 until like the time when the vaccines were actually available. Also, actually, there was another turn, and it was vaccination was refuted mostly initially in Bratislava, in the center of in the capital of the country, where the other regions had a higher interest. Actually, real vaccination was complete opposite. The capital is vaccinated, well above the average of European Union, while actually the rest of the country is not vaccinated, sometimes even at the half level. So it's really, there was a switch. And so these were the facts, I see in the data. So let me get to the factors which may explain what happened in Slovakia and why this happened. So first of all is the political question. So the political aspect is that the whole opposition in Slovakia is actually fighting vaccination. None of the political leaders of the opposition is actually vaccinated at this point. None. Zero. And also, actually, multiple government leaders were hesitant about their vaccination. One of them was claiming he's completely immune, he doesn't need to be vaccinated. Another one actually was not willing to release his vaccination status to the public. And at the end, he got vaccinated by Sputnik. That was the leader of the government at the time. So that was not really easy to read what the politicians want to say. So if you look at the political leaders, you could see actually a failure, except the president. That was actually one of the good example. Also the Ministry of Health, fortunately. On the other hand, this may be connected with other aspects of Slovak politics, which are very special. We have a very high level of plagiarism, proved plagiarism in between the government people and the leader of the parliament, the leader of the coalition, so the prime minister, the Ministry of Education. All of them actually falsificated their diploma thesis. So all of them. Imagine that, not just one, all of them. So this is something you actually don't see in any other European country. So there's really not that much to trust for the public. That's another point. So what really happened was then the government, because some small mistakes, failed to order Pfizer vaccines initially in the large orders. They waived the right to obtain more vaccines. And so this was, of course, not to public pleasure because people really demanded vaccines at the time. So the prime minister at the time tried to fix the situation and they ordered Sputnik vaccine instead. But connected to that was a huge campaign, for example, discrediting of AstraZeneca and also the other vaccines. So actually the government started to talk and, some bad talk the vaccines itself. So because Sputnik is the right one, don't really look for the others. So that all opened up, all this, the Pandora box of, should we trust the vaccines? We see, and also, the opposition, not the opposition, also the scientists were opposing the Sputnik vaccine. Of course, they were pointing out the problems with the safety and possible side effects when we don't have the information. And that opened up the Pandora box completely. So people really, start to disbelieve in vaccines. So even those who actually were willing. Then at the time, we had the massive antigen testing campaign. Actually, it was probably the largest or the most massive antigen testing in the world in Slovakia, which actually pertained not only in fall 2020, but also in the spring 2021. So many people actually could think that, instead of vaccination, we can just get tested, regularly, once a week. So why do we need to get vaccinated if we have such a successful testing program? The government was claiming it's so successful, and actually it led us to the number one in the world in the deaths and most hospitalizations. So it was very successful, I would say. So sorry for being so sarcastic. So as I said, that was all the mainstream media supported vaccination, and also all the scientists actually who appeared on the television and in the media were all supporting vaccination. So nevertheless, we got this problem. So at some point, people stopped stopped the trust into these mainstream sources, and they came somewhere else. That's what somewhere happened. Also, what I see actually is that there was a failure of European Union to provide help with vaccination campaign to these countries. We didn't get any support from European Union. And actually, when you look at this Eurobarometer, you can see a high level of trust into European Union. But they didn't help. They provided the vaccines, but that was it. Provided vaccines, and that it ends. So we would benefit probably at that point where the trust to the government was low, if some other European organs would step in and some way help the prioritization of the vaccination. So actually, Slovak people mostly want from European government, of course, or European Union, the protection of outer borders.
You have 1 more minute.
Yeah, and so we also had this low level of vaccination hesitancy between medical doctors. But let me get to my main point. So my main point is that what Michal was mentioning before is the polarization. So when I said that most people believe, or many people believe, mostly to their friends, their mathematical models would indicate that this leads necessarily to the polarization. So if you have big discrepancies or big level or high level of trust into the friends, not to any other source of any other source of information, then it necessarily leads to polarization. Let me, if you look at Eurobarometer, you can see that highest levels, far highest levels, are Slovakia, Romania, Croatia, and the leader is Bulgaria. The lowest level is Portugal, Denmark, Finland. So when you're looking for the source of vaccine hesitancy, you just need to look when people believe their friends and not anything else.
Wow, thank you so much. Well, Dimitry, Russia was the first to launch its vaccine. Its Sputnik even exported it, and Russians don't really trust its own vaccine. So I think about 48% of the Russian population is fully vaccinated, and the number of boosters is really low. Could you give us your take why Russians do not trust their vaccines? And you also mentioned when we prepared this event about the whole movement against vaccines that is gaining pace in Russia. Please, Dimitry.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I can see, unfortunately, a lot of similarities with what had been said already. But our context is a little bit more complicated, as I can see it, because there is the kind of the authoritarian context. And that is why I should say immediately, so this is my personal position, and I'm not representing the position of HCE. I'm still associate professor of. And they're one of the political momentum when the pandemic started. That was the situation with the preparation, so-called amendments to the Russian constitution, which is de facto granted the current president to be elected for the enormous amount of time further. So that's in reality, that was not the amendment to the constitution, but it was just a referendum to grant the president be eternal president of Russian Federation. That's why I believe the health of the Russian population had been sacrificed. Let me be clear here. So for this political purpose, because in the middle of the pandemic storm, it was organized a called referendum, which was legally absolutely odd, because there is no such procedure in the Russian constitutional law. But nevertheless, it was organized the referendum. The amendment had been adopted, and then. Only after this referendum, they started the active propaganda to ask people to get vaccination. Because for the first half of the year of the 2020, it was the lot of the state-controlled media disseminated this official medical information. That is just a regular flu. Do not care. And it was the official, and because it's Russia, the most sources of information for the majority still is the state-controlled television. And this state-controlled television and the special medical program disseminated the knowledge for the population, describing the coronavirus as just a regular flu. You shouldn't care. This is not a big deal. And then the situation changed dramatically after the referendum. Oh, that is really bad. You should go to the vaccination. This is the one story. The second story, immediately the vaccination started to be the project to demonstrate the efficiency of the authoritarian regime. And keeping in mind that in this context, we are living in the situation of the statistics we cannot trust. The Alexei Raksha, who used to be at that time the work for the state agency for the statistic, who opened the mouth and said that this is not statistic we can trust, he was immediately removed from his position. And now he's independent professional who criticized the current situation. The good example would be right now, the statistics is somehow they messed up the people who had been vaccinated for the second dose and those who had been revaccinated. So this is not the numbers we can trust. Well, I can see that around the 50% of the population, they do vaccinated, and that was the more or less equal to the number of the people who do trust to the president, to the current government, and to the political situation in general. And the second point is, of course, there's serious resistance, ironically, among the Russian doctors. Follow the sociological survey, 1/3 of the Russian doctors decided not to get immunization, not to be vaccinated. And even more, among the follow against the sociological review recent year, 7% of the people who decided not to get vaccinated, they explained the reason they have got the special recommendation from the doctors not to get the vaccination, because that is the unhealthy, this might be dangerous for your health, and so on and so forth. That is how the system of the health, of medical care, working against the official state, official goals of the Russian state. And this is the second point. And the third point maybe is it's about the anti-vaccination movement. We have literally a strange combination of the people who are belief in the conspiracy, that was the Soros supported vaccine, who paid to decrease the number of the population in the world, and all these strange theories. But at the same time, we have the special so-called National Association of Doctors, or it's called Independent Association of Doctors, completed on the number of the doctors with the medical degrees. Some of them, honestly, they have the kind of alternative medicine representative, and they're this alternative medicine homeopathists, for example. They organize the kind of special so-called audit of the medical data and try to demonstrate how the vaccine is just working against its final goal, how the vaccine increased the death rate and the mortality rate, and so forth. That is the second story. And final story, I believe, in this context, is that the situation is how the Russians' legacy, the unfortunate legacy of the Russian population, is to be under serious pressure to find out how we could, trick or how we could manipulate all this serious pressure from the government. Because we do have a number of the stories already, how the doctors, being paid for the falsification documents about the immunization. They provide the list of immunization, but not vaccinated people, just for the be bribed. And there is the second story is how many people try to falsify the QR code, or just sharing QR code. So this is irony. In reality, the Soviet people, well, post-Soviet people, they have elaborated numerous practices which allow them to avoid the state control. And they consider these immunization restrictions, lockdowns, QR code campaign, and so forth. This is the kind of restrictions which is more or less they can easily avoid. They can easily, avoid, because that is so easy, either to pay people for the violation of these the rules, or to find out how we could falsify these documents, or how we could, copy the QR code or share QR code and so forth. And I'll stop here, maybe with the final statement. That is the interesting how the Russia being, well, more or less modernized in the part of the European country, at the same time sharing the substantial part of the Soviet legacy. And in this concrete social political situation, this is the strange combination of the features which is that my colleagues already described, and the distrust to the doctors, distrust to the government, and at the same time with the combination of the, let's say, natural resistance to the authoritarian pressure. Because the policy, how the Russian government provide this policy, this is not democratic way to push this vaccination. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Not very uplifting for combating the pandemic. Oana from Bucharest, Oana, explain to us why Romania is so resistant to vaccines. It's second from the bottom. The bottom meaning the least vaccinating population is Bulgaria. Oana, the screen is yours. Could you just give us an overview? Is it about politics? Is it about media? What is it about?
It's about all of the above. Hi, Mirjana, and thank you for the invitation. I see a lot of commonalities with those who have spoken before. So let me go through the context first of all, and that is just like in other cases that we've heard about, deep distrust of government, and that deep distrust of government means that after a long time that people have been used to the government, to feeling that the government is working against them rather than for them, and mainly catering to their own personal interests. When you suddenly hear that the government is out there telling you they're looking out for you and that you have to vaccinate for your own sake and so on and so forth, and abide by restrictions for your own sake, you are naturally suspicious and you think, come on, there is no way. I mean, the government has never behaved in a way that was coherent with the idea of them caring for me. So now if they're doing this, then it's probably also for their own interest, actually, and not for myself. So the first thing is this deep distrust of government. The second is a distrust of the medical system and the healthcare system in general. Partly because we've seen a tremendous brain drain of doctors and nurses and medical personnel leaving the country over the past few years, going abroad. And if you put that together with an overall collapse in the infrastructure, the medical infrastructure in the country, just because of neglect and low GDP percentages being allocated to the medical system over the years, what that has led to is the fact that people outside of the big cities have barely have access to quality medical services, and they have got used to that. So when they think about going to the hospital, when they think about getting medical advice, they're very skeptical because they know they would have to travel to a big city. They know that the doctors that they have available in their communities are not necessarily well prepared, or they don't have what they need at their disposal to really care for them. So that really has led to increasing the distance between the regular citizen and the medical system. So people are not used to listening to doctors anymore, to seeking medical advice, and they'd rather do it just going to their friends or on social media and so on and so forth. Now, the other problem that compounds this is the feeling and that after 1989 we've had about liberty and the definition of liberty, and I'm afraid that when you look at the old saying of my freedom ends where yours begins, I'm afraid we haven't come to the second part of the phrase, because we've had such control over communism that for many Romanians, freedom now means complete freedom, and that is done at the expense of social responsibility. It is very much a rather selfish sense of competition with the others rather than solidarity with the others, and that is that's not just my subjective perception. That's something that's been measured. Unfortunately, we're not a people that's characterized by empathy, because we have very, very low levels. I think we rank there second from the bottom as well in the European Union in terms of levels of social trust. We don't trust the government and the institutions, but we also don't trust one another. We don't trust anyone around us. So that really leads to a sense of societal breakdown. And what you're dealing with, if you have to manage a crisis now in Romania, is not really a society with clearly identifiable categories of population, let's say, but a very loose collection of individuals who each have their own motivations to act in a certain way. And there has been no education over the decades, and that again comes to a large extent from the very low investment in education. And again, that correlates with the fact that, again, we rank very low within the European Union in terms of quality of education, PISA tests, for instance. So since there has been no attempt to educate people as to what freedom means, what responsibility means, who to believe, what, increased media literacy, democratic literacy, and so on and so forth, that makes for a very non-resilient population, essentially. And if we now move to rather the actions of the government against the background of this context, there has also been very, very poor communication. The process was initially highly politicized, and at the beginning of the pandemic, politicians actually thought they would be able to derive political capital by handling the vaccination campaign, because they simply ignored the numbers, the sheer numbers of people who they would not be able to convince. So they thought, now we're going to manage this crisis, we're going to roll out the vaccines and people are going to be applauding us. And so they didn't really put any major effort into proper communication. They didn't seek to reach people through community influencers, because when you have that situation that I described, which is this breakdown of trust, what you can do is to identify whom people trust and reach out to them, whether it's priests or teachers, or perhaps social media influencers or football stars or whoever. Or the other category is GPs, so what we call family doctors, who are very often the only persons in working in the medical system that people actually do have a connection with. So none of these categories has been activated or used. The government only tried to communicate via the media, but the media in Romania is highly corrupt, highly controlled by political interests, and much of it has actually worked as a sounding board for anti-vaxxer messages rather than for the official and scientifically validated messages. So there was this complete failure of strategic communications. And on the other hand, on social media and elsewhere, even in the street, you had a very aggressive campaign by anti-vaxxers whose interest is not necessarily just in opposing vaccination, but you have to bear in mind that the COVID pandemic settled in, so to speak, soon after we had elections that returned a nationalistic extremist party for the first time after 2008 in the Romanian parliament at 9%. So there was this growing trend of anti-establishment, rather radical discourse. And once this party got into parliament, they were now part of the establishment. So it's hard to work as an anti-establishment party when you become part of the establishment and need to be responsible. And the pandemic gave them a renewed reason to call for protests, to act outside of the institutions, to denounce the establishment. So that's where this very strong anti-vaxxer movement comes, which is generally coupled with anti-Western messages of the sort, foreign agents are actually behind this whole conspiracy of a pandemic. It's in fact all a big international conspiracy. Our government functions as agents of influence of these foreign powers. They're not serving our interests. Again, very nationalistic messages that basically say this is just the big pharma conspiracy. Why don't we produce our own vaccines? Why don't we produce our own treatments, and so on and so forth? So all of this is.
Anna, you have less than a minute. Sorry,
yes,
it's fascinating.
I'll end now saying that on top of that, within responsible government institutions, similarly low percentages, around 40%, let's say as high as 60% in the best cases, are vaccinated. So those who are promoting the vaccination campaign aren't vaccinated themselves. And so what we have now is actually that this new coalition that's in power, the Social Democrats and the Liberals, have given up altogether on the vaccination campaign, and they have shifted the focus on trying to lift the pressure from the hospitals. So the whole idea with Omicron is to try and treat the mild cases at home and the medium serious cases at home to lift the pressure on the medical system. There's essentially nobody's trying to boost the vaccination campaign anymore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Evgenii, I'm glad you made it.
I'm here finally, yes.
I give you 5 minutes, unfortunately. Could you tell us, Bulgaria has the lowest vaccination rates and the highest death rates, not only in Europe, almost in the world. It is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, second to Peru.
Yes.
Could you explain to us the situation? And I give you 5 minutes, sorry, but I don't think that it's so different from what colleagues had to say about Romania and Slovakia.
It's not very different. The same trends run through Bulgaria, but I'm a political scientist, and I would like to group the reasons why people are not vaccinated into 3 major deficits we have in this part of the world and in Bulgaria. Deficit number 1, we have a very weak democratic culture. What does this mean? At the heart of democracy is a constant debate based on agreed facts. A debate with a view of coming to an agreement, what to do. We don't have this. We don't have an agreement on facts. We disagree that there even can be agreed facts. We cannot hold a sustained debate. What we have is people making declarations at each other and not entering into a long debate with a view of agreement. That's first major deficit. Second major deficit, lack of solidarity. For 45 years, the communist regime specifically implemented policies and activities to break up solidarity between people. Because if they're solidaristic, maybe they can get together and criticize the party. We still have this. We do not trust each other. We have the same low levels of trust as the Romanians. So we're not solidaristic. So it's no good telling anybody, get yourself vaccinated, because otherwise you may spread the disease to someone more vulnerable than you. That doesn't work. Anything to do with appealing to the common good doesn't really work in a non-solidaristic society. Deficit number 3. we've heard this from the previous speakers, a dramatic lack of trust in the government. We think the government lies to us on the TV screen. And recently we've had this kind of Trumpian thing, a catastrophic loss of faith in independent experts. Someone appears on TV, says, I'm the expert, here's my independent view. People see that person as a propagandist being paid to spread pro-government propaganda, so nobody trusts experts. And of course, we have all these conspiracy theories in place of expert discussion. In most cases, this kind of situation feeds directly into politics, and people elect authoritarian populist leaders. In Bulgaria's case, it has not fed into politics. We now have a left liberal centrist green government, very civilized, very modernistic, modern looking, modernizing. But it has fed, because it hasn't fed into politics with us, it has fed into this complete distrust of anything to do with the vaccines, which is why we have today hit 30% of the population vaccinated, and people say, hey, we're 30% vaccinated. That's it.
Thank you. And Luisa, Portugal has a 90% vaccination rate. 90% of the population has had two vaccines. But Portugal does not have, we have mentioned so much trust today in political institutions and the lack of democratic culture. Portugal is latecomer to democracy, let's put it this way. How do you explain this high level of trust in vaccines in Portugal? And please, the screen is yours. By the way, for the audience, in the chat, we have linked to CVs to for all our speakers, so I don't have to repeat them. Lisa?
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning.
So it's very interesting. It's very interesting because when I was listening the other people, the other speakers before me, it was and I was listening the reasons why the people is not vaccinated, the situation, and they linked this situation with the authoritarian regimes. So the situation in Portugal worked the other way around. I mean, maybe the Portuguese people, we just have elections last Sunday. And surprisingly, we had an absolute majority. So it means that at least we can say that the people trust in this government. But the people in Portugal, really, they trust the vaccination. And possibly the roots of this situation lie in our authoritarian past. And this is curious regarding the other examples. I can explain. Before 1974, it was the date of our revolution, democratic revolution. Portugal was a very poor country, as you know, and all I think that you know, and specifically with a high infant mortality rate. I mean that a lot of children die with the most common diseases, infant diseases. I mean, I don't know, measles, chickenpox, meningitis. So this kind of diseases. But after the implementation, the implementation of our democratic regime, and most important, the National Health Service, it was possible to extend vaccination to all age groups and in particularly in children. So today, 97% of children are vaccinated against most of dangerous disease. So this situation or something similar happened with the COVID and the pandemic. I mean, people was very, very afraid when the pandemic started in 2020. Yes, in March 2020, 2 years from now. People were very, very afraid. but they scrupulously obeyed to the rules dictated by the government. At the beginning, it was decreed a state of emergency and a lockdown, and people obeyed. In fact, the people retreat to their homes, in particular, parents refused to take their children to the schools before the government decided to do so. So it was the civil society who decided to do it. So with the emergency of the vaccine in the end of the 2020, the first official vaccination system or committee was set up did not work well. It was led by a politician and who suffered several attacks and from the opposition, and the political situation, which was quite tense at that time, ended up undermining the whole service, the whole COVID situation, vaccination system. It was then, and this is the curious part, it was then that the government decided to appoint as head of this committee a military man with charisma, an admiral, and with management and leadership skills. And in 9 months, he managed to get almost 90% of the population vaccinated. And as usual, the people joined this in droves, if you can say. Now we have we have many cases because of Omicron, but the people are no longer afraid, and they still adhere to the vaccination. But it is probably that they are going to anticipate the government again. I mean, declare the end of the pandemic and the beginning of the endemic before the government does. Anyhow, I think that we'll have a new government in the end of February, but the present government wanted to set up the goal to vaccinate it, to get the booster of the entire eligible people population, by February 20, and I think that we will manage, because people trust in vaccination. They saw in the past, they work it, and so it's. I think that the government along this process, the government listened to the doctors and all the kind of specialists. There was a meeting every week or every 15 days, and the government, after these meetings with all government and the president of the republic and the leader of all parties, they could assist to these meetings with the specialists. And after these meetings, the government decided the measures. So I think that this month, before, but maybe after the new government, will leave the restrictions. So that's it. It's a fine story.
Thank you so much. Well, I have a lot of experience in Spain, and which also has a very high vaccination rate. And it is fascinating, this comparison that you made, because in countries as poor as Portugal and Spain, until about 30 years ago, there is a huge trust in the public health system.
Yes.
And in Eastern Europe, where during the communist period, there was more trust in the public health system than there is now, because the system is falling apart. So it's exactly the opposite. And I'm just wondering, you know, the six of you have revealed such huge differences within one continent, and yet the pandemic doesn't know about political differences. And, you know, it will be defeated when everyone is more or less at the same level. And the word trust and social responsibility and solidarity has come over and over and over. I open the floor for questions, and I think that in the future, I'll definitely organize something about trust. I don't know how, Michael, you come from a country with huge trust. Is there anything that you could recommend to your colleagues? How can one increase trust, or it has to come from within? Michael?
Yes, so thank you very much, and thank you so much for all the other interesting presentations. It has been really illuminating to get these other perspectives. So if we look at the causes of political trust, or sorry, if we look at the general causes of trust, then it does seem to be very closely related to the way political institutions are operating. Low corruption is key. But then there's also other factors beyond low corruption. There is the degree of economic equality in a country, and then we also know that being ethnic homogeneous also helps. But what our research also suggests is that it's good to have those sort of historical background factors in place when you enter a crisis, but it also matters what authorities do during the crisis, because you can pretty quickly lose trust. So it's important to communicate in a way that people feel is transparent, that they're not hiding away negative factors and the complexities and the trade-offs. And that's why I'm also saying that the basis for citizens' trust in the state is that the state trusts the citizens with the complications and by behaving in a trustworthy manner.
Thank you. May I open the floor? The thing is, you can raise your hand, or you can just tell me in the chat that you want to ask a question. Everything is clear, or everything is so depressing? Well, Ivan?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, fascinating, and as Michael said, very illuminating. It shows that the European project is faltering on this issue. It had huge problems at the beginning. The Eurovax really failed. We heard that from one or two speakers, that vaccines were not being delivered in time. So that also at that moment created a certain level of distrust in the European institutions. Then Europe slowly caught up, and other countries were actually everyone for themselves, which was not at all a good way to address something that's a global issue. And as Mariana said, based on what we heard from the Portuguese experience, indeed, in the varieties of communist countries that we had, including my own, which was Yugoslavia, and Mirjana's, vaccines were absolutely available. And in fact, we had a pandemic of smallpox, I believe, in 1971, and the whole population of close to 20 million people were vaccinating in the span of 3 weeks, I think. It was a major, dare I say, military operation, and no one raised an eyebrow. It was about saving lives. And here we have the complete opposite. My country now, Serbia, is somewhere in the middle. It's just above, it's around 50-51%, so not doing as badly as some others. But as you all said, this raises some really difficult political questions. And the way that Oana described, for example, the Romanian situation is worrying, as is the Slovak example, that political leaders have not vaccinated themselves. So we really have to dig deep into the complexity of the various issues that are driving this behavior. And until I think there's, and you've all said it, until there's a clarity of message and a clarity of purpose and a belief in what the government is saying as being the decision based on facts, as Evgenii so rightly put, that democracy is really based on agreed facts. And I think that's really what we're battling with. But I would like to go specifically to Dimitry in Russia. Does he see a way in which some of this can be turned around? Mirjana said, in fact, yes, that Sputnik V was the first vaccine that appeared, and that even the population does not trust its own vaccine. And I just want to mention again the fact that we're not using all vaccines available in the world. I find a problem. So Dimitry, could you help me understand and help us understand?
Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah. Indeed, so that's what I missed in my presentation. So this is an irony. Russia does have the working vaccine, but substantial amount of population do not trust in Russian vaccine, not in vaccine at all, not in vaccination. But that is the reason why there's substantial amount, including me, by the way. I visited Serbia to be vaccinated, but that was for the purpose of international travel. And this is that's the question of the international relations. But in reality, the substantial amount, I cannot pretend they say that all the anti-vaccinators, but substantial amount of them, they do not trust the Russian vaccine because the Russian government failed to prove its validity for its own population. I'm not speaking about the World Health Organization, but for its own organization, that's really failed to prove its validity, its efficiency. That is why substantial amount of Russians who could, that was small amount, they visited these different countries and they got vaccinated there. But I believe if the Russia would open these doors and the international organization would supply the Russia for the alternative vaccine, we would increase the number of vaccinated people for sure.
Can you just a quick follow-up question? I mean, Russian medicine or previously Soviet medicine is a hugely kind of based medicine on science. There have been many successes. I mean, let alone going to the moon, and thus a lot of medicine was required there as well. What is the reason that this homologation, even in Russia, has had a problem to show that it is a safe vaccine? Or I've heard people say, well, it's really, they're not sure about the production line and that it's completely safe or not. Can you say a sentence or two on that?
Well, 2 points. One point is there was absolutely non-transparent way to produce it. So this is absolutely unclear where exactly it had been produced and what is the condition of the production. That's for sure. But secondly, excuse me. Secondly, is that the story with Russia produced free vaccine, by the way. And they started to produce simultaneously, start to vaccinate simultaneously the three different vaccine. By irony, is the one vaccine prove its, let's say, negative efficiency, because the people vaccinated of this vaccine, they died more frequently than those who had been non-vaccinated. And this is the story. Well, that is the Russian system right now. It is the strange combination of the post-Soviet legacy and the no-liberal reforms. And that is why this is the keeping in mind the non-transparency and let's say the lack of the real market. And because everything is more or less related to who get closer to the body of the authority. And that is why the situation, but it was worse and was unclear for the population to understand how what is efficient and valid.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitry. I have seen two hands raised. First, it was Georg Kauschenberg. Could you please introduce yourself? And then I'll take Tamara Sil and then the replies. Georg, please.
Yes, I'm coming. Hello. Yes. I'm from Institute of the Danube region in Central Europe, and I think it was extremely important also what you mentioned at the end. Trust is key. Everybody was talking about trust in governments, and I wonder about the trust in media and the influence of media, including social media. How is it in the respective countries? Thank you.
Thank you. Tamara, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I do. My name is Tamara.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I do that. My name is Tamara Sil. I'm a journalist working for the Austrian broadcast ORF. What do the experts think of mandatory vaccines as we have it in Austria? Like, do you think it's a solution, or maybe it just increases the polarization in society? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamara. First question, trust. Who would like to reply about trust in media? Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the data from the Eurobarometer, and I must say, I don't see a difference between the trust levels to media between countries which are highly vaccinated and those who are not. So even if you look at any different sources of trust where people look for primary information, the only one which actually correlates well with the vaccination levels is actually trust in your friends. So actually, you know, this is quite a surprising thing, because we're looking at the websites, we're looking at the media, we're looking at the government, but it turns out what really matters is how many people find their primary information. You know, they trust mostly to their own neighborhood. So that's it, because this is uneducated. That leads to the polarization afterward, and there's no way to stop it, because mathematics shows you that once you have this phenomena, people polarize, and actually the result, how they polarize depends on the initial conditions some way, and on the level of formation when these sides are formated. So I would say the media, trust in media is very different across European countries. But what really matters is where there's no other source, actually only your friends. Don't trust your friends with vaccination. That's a mistake.
Thank you. Awana, would you like to take the thing about media as well?
Yeah, so very briefly to the media question, the situation in Romania is paradoxical, because people distrust the media in multiple polls. When they are asked about their trust in mainstream media as well as in social media, they say that they don't trust it. When they are asked if they think they can be misinformed, they say no. So they have a lot of distrust of the media and social media, but they have a lot of trust in their own abilities to make out what is true and what is not. And that's a sort of cognitive dissonance, if you want. That's really at the root of a lot of the disinformation that's going around, because people tend to be very confident that they know they can choose, but they actually don't have the instruments or the education, or even the since there is no source of mainstream media that's highly regarded, like the BBC, like the Guardian, like Politiken in Denmark, like so many other newspapers, publications, TV stations across Western Europe. In Romania, there is no such source that sets standards. So people don't really have those standards to guide them and to check information, which is really problematic, because essentially you are really left on your own to make sense of the whole debacle that's happening on the internet. But very, very briefly, something that touches on the second question as well, and I think that's important. I think we also have, there's some good news about this, which is, frankly, when you see, and that's at least the situation in Romania, but I think I feel that in Bulgaria, Slovakia, Russia, it's quite similar. When people have legitimate grounds not to trust the government, not necessarily on vaccination, but in general, and so they reject something that is promoted from the government level, that is actually a manifestation of democracy. I mean, people might not be able to make out what is, when they should follow the government and when they shouldn't, but they are able to identify that there's something wrong in how they're being governed, that there's something wrong with how politicians communicate, and they reject that. So I think, that there's also a form of healthy opposition to government, at least among those who are really genuinely rejecting the vaccination campaign because they don't know if they should believe that what the government says is really true. And I think that is, again, rather healthy. And it is also, unfortunately, we are having this kind of spike in Central Eastern Europe learning to fight for its rights, ask for its rights from the government, question the government. We're only doing this 30 plus years after the fall of communism, and it's a really unfortunate time. On the other hand, the bad news, I think, and where we are failing to a large extent and governments are failing, is that against this general atmosphere of mistrust in government and people rejecting anything that comes from the government as potentially being false, the only solution that's been found, and in many ways it's a natural one, and you see it in Austria now, are vaccine mandates, and the whole discussion of should we make this mandatory? Should we make the green certificates mandatory for travel, for various things? And the problem is, while it might be very efficient, this measure is in itself non-democratic, because it's not the result of a debate, of a public debate, of opposing views that has resulted in this solution. It's actually the result of a collapse in our ability to have that public debate. And it's a very top-down measure, which only increases people's suspicion. And that's another really sad thing, because genuinely, it might be a very good solution. Maybe we should have done it earlier. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a health specialist, but the way it's happening, unfortunately, only strengthens the existing suspicion already.
Thank you so much. Michael, please.
Yes, thank you so much. And Oana said some of the key points that I wanted to make with regards to mandatory vaccinations, but I just want to underscore that we have pretty solid evidence from my research project that putting pressure on the unvaccinated will decrease the trust that they have in the state, and we have just been talking about how important that trust is. So even though you might actually get them vaccinated, then they might decrease their compliance with other measures, or they might come out of the crisis with less trust. I also want to make one other point, and that is that I think Omicron has fundamentally changed the calculus when it comes to mandatory vaccinations, and I think at this, so the vaccines were being approved on the basis of the ability to hinder severe disease, but the rhetoric in public discourse shifted towards stopping transmissions. But that is very clear with Omicron, that it doesn't stop the spreading of the disease. So at this point, you cannot justify mandatory vaccinations with the direct threat that an unvaccinated person poses for another individual through disease spread. It solely needs to be justified by the pressure that an unvaccinated person can put on the hospitalization systems, and that makes it much more difficult than with regards to Delta.
Thank you very much. Dimitry, you wanted to say something, and then the question from Stephanie Pak. Go ahead.
No, I just need to return very briefly to the question about media. So that's a very interesting story. Was introduced a special amendment to the legislation in April 1st in the 2020, immediately after the first wave of the corona started. And that was the Russian legislation amendment, the special punishment, persecution for the fake news. And it's already for 3 weeks. Just imagine they issued almost 300 warnings and orders about using allegedly fake news in the Russian media. And interestingly enough, keeping in mind in the context, some of them, they are really about the conspiracy, and that is the coronavirus, the myth invented by the source and so forth. But substantial amount of them were the criticism about the measures implemented by the state. It was just literally to stop the critical voices. And this is how, and then immediately the anti-vaccinators recognize it. Oh, that is how the government repressed those who are trying to speak in truth. And that's additional. I mean, this is the increasing. That's I'm to follow up what Michael Patterson said. That's about the distrust, because immediately if you started to use the authoritarian measures to persecute those who are trying to do something in this regard, that's just immediately rather decrease the level of their own trust and working literally against your final task.
Thank you, Dimitry. Stephanie?
Hello, Stephanie Park-Homolka from the Austrian daily newspaper Salzburger Nachrichten. I have a follow-up question for Dimitry concerning the distrust in the Russian vaccines, and especially when it comes to the distrust of doctors, which you mentioned earlier. And we've heard from some other countries that a lot of people don't trust the experts, but in Russia, it seems that also the experts don't trust the vaccines. So do people generally trust the health system and the doctors, or they don't trust the vaccines and they don't trust the doctors?
No, even worse. I'm speaking mostly about the public experts, and that's about the media doctor expert. This is the doctors they visited regularly. So they're all their personal medicians, or their medical specialists they are visiting regularly. And this is the problem because the neoliberal reform in the Russian medical sphere. We lost a substantial amount of the professionals in the budget organizations, and it seriously decreased the level of the level of education and training of those who had been right now hired for this position, instead of those who left for the commercials. And these people sometimes they're sharing. So I personally, well, my kids were, I was complaining. I was complaining against the doctor of my kids when the doctor tried to convince me not to immunize my own children. So this is the absolutely regular practice, and that is why it's, of course, it depends on the level of how seriously you're resistance about this knowledge. But if your belief in the specialist or doctor said that, this is not about the public media. This is the regular context, the regular recommendation you have got from your doctors.
Dimitry, I have just a small follow-up question. We recently had a conversation also for journalists and academics with Ivan Krastev, the political scientist, and he said that one of the reasons so many doctors in Bulgaria, for example, are questioning the vaccine is because of their age. Young doctors have migrated, so it is the older generation that doesn't trust these new vaccines. Just give me a short answer, and then Chris Elliott.
Actually, I do not see any correlations here. I'm afraid. So, well, of course, but that's only on my personal experience. We need to kind of survey here.
Okay, thank you. Chris, please.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Please introduce yourself, Chris.
Sorry, Chris Elliott, journalist, ex-Guardian and Telegraph, sadly outside of Europe. In the UK, the National Health Service is about as close, it was once said it was as close to a religion as the British people have. And it's absolutely true. And it's the thing which has really got the vaccine going, although the government has taken a large chunk of credit for it. However, it is staggering the way in which we've got this dynamic where scientists have come into conflict with things like our major popular newspaper, which has been tackling experts because politically, and this is the thing which through everything I've heard today, and certainly in the UK, somehow something which should be a matter of science has become a matter of politics. I suppose it's a bit naive. And I just wondered the extent to which you felt that this is the major factor, that it's just not a matter of science, is actually a matter of politics, and science comes a poor second.
Who would you like to ask?
Please, whoever would like to answer.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question indeed. For the religious people, this is a kind of challenge all the time, because virus is something you cannot observe. That's something almost imaginary object. But in reality, in Russia, for example, when it comes to church, that's the two different pressure to the religious people. For the one side, official authority of the Russian Church clearly stated there's their attitudes to the vaccination.
I think the question was something else, Dimitry. The question is that the science is politicized. To what extent it is a political issue? It has nothing to do with the church.
Yeah, but science, well, and science here, so this is another problem. Science here under serious pressure of religion. And and when it comes to politicization of the science, of course, there is a substantial amount of the doctors. They consider themselves religious people, and here is one of the explanation why they sometimes feel themselves rather religious people than the specialists. But when it comes to the politics, of course, in the authoritarian context, it's very difficult to criticize and to have an open discussion about the results. And even the example of the Sputnik, which proved to be successful, but their government failed to prove it for its own population because there is not enough data published and not an open discussion about the pros and cons.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you very much. I completely agree that we, during the corona virus pandemic, have seen a politicization of science, and we're seeing that with regards to vaccines. We're seeing that with regards to understanding the virus itself, and you could say that it happens on a historical backdrop where there has been increasing discussions about science, and one of my fears is how will this translate into the next crises that we are facing, especially the climate crisis. So I do fear that the coronavirus pandemic will accelerate discussions about science in relation to climate. I do want to say though also that sometimes I do feel that scientists have also not recognized that the management of the pandemic is politics. Like there are political decisions to be made because there are different things that you need to make trade-offs between, and that's not the job of the scientist. That is the job of the politician. But of course, the political decisions, it's absolutely crucial that they are based on the best available science.
Thank you, Oana.
Yeah, also, just bear in mind that in Romania, for instance, the Orthodox Church and very, very recognizable figures in the Orthodox Church have explicitly pronounced themselves against vaccines, against government restrictions. They deliberately broke government restrictions during the lockdown. And in the end, the government ended up pandering to the church. So whenever we had restrictions, and at least during the first wave, we had some of the toughest restrictions, the freedom of assembly for religious purposes, the freedom to go to church, to attend mass together indoors, and so on and so forth, that was allowed, and there was no explanation provided. So there is no surprise that people will not look for the science anymore when essentially the government that's supposed to deliver the scientific message says the scientific proof underlies our strategy, but it stops when we're talking about the church, and people cannot assemble to protest. They cannot assemble, for leisure and entertainment. They cannot go to the theater. They cannot go to the cinema. They have to have green certificates to go to the mall, but they can go to church in any numbers, anytime, indoors, outdoors, whatever they want, because that's freedom of religion. So obviously then, you cannot discuss science anymore when the government itself says science stops where religion begins.
Thank you very much. And last comment, Richard, please.
Just a very short one. I'm a mathematician, so if you really look at the opinion formation models, if the information hubs fail to provide clear information, then people start to look somewhere else. And the mathematical models clearly show that then actually you really are relying only on your neighbors, so on the information from your friends. And that's really what happened, what we see actually happened during the pandemic. So I see this as a primary source of the problems that the governments in certain countries and the other institutions didn't provide reliable information and didn't provide the information which was trustful for the public, general public, and then they look somewhere else. Once they start to do that, it's happening. It's happening. They look somewhere else. So it's a moment. It's a dynamics, and many countries miss this opportunity. And based on their history, political history, they already had some difficulties at the beginning. So I see this as a actually very expectable outcome. So no surprise here.
Well, I just have to say a very brief anecdote, and I will end as you were talking about trusting friends more than institutions. In Belgrade, where I'm from, every neighbor does a medical diagnosis, and there was a wonderful spot. It was on TV or somewhere that I saw an advertisement for a hospital that stated, if your neighbor doesn't know the diagnosis, please come to us. So on the other hand, after everything we have heard, it is not so much the question of disease, and people are dying, it is a question of politics. And Europe is so diverse, and we have not replied to all the questions today, but I hope that journalists and professors and whoever is in this Zoom and in streaming today are at least inspired to think about it and to influence wherever they can, because one country cannot combat on its own this pandemic. Unfortunately, whatever variant of COVID we have, it doesn't know if we live in an authoritarian country or in democracy, or if we have trust in the institutions or we do not. I thank everybody, stay healthy, and we shall continue. You have raised up so many topics. Ivan and Daniela?
Well, just to say thank you to everyone, and especially to you, Mirjana, who put all this together. I think this is something that, at least during these 2 years of the pandemic, I haven't had such an in-depth insight as today.
Thank you very much. Daniela?
Thank you so much to the speakers, and thank you to Mirjana, excellent as always. And just a short announcement from my side. The next talk is on the future of the BBC with Emily Bell from Columbia University. It's on Thursday, February 10th at 6 p.m. Central European Time. And at this point, special thanks to Chris Elliott for connecting us with Emily Bell, which it's just my last remark. These meetings are not only about knowledge, but also about networking. So stay tuned and join us again the next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And get vaccinated if you are not.
Hope to see you soon in Vienna in person.
That's right.
Take care.
Thank you.
You too. We will close the room in a few seconds.